Hey guys, in this episode, we talked to Roshni and Zia, two experienced practitioners of the art of permaculture. They share their mystical experiences with nature and plant spirits. We learn why permaculture is incredibly important for both you and the land, how human consciousness is linked to the evolution of the earth, and how our health is linked to the health of the planet, applying the golden rule to the earth, and how we can turn to plants and get a deeper understanding of them for our own inner advancement. Is exactly the type of hippiness you'd expect on the Woke as Fuck podcast. See you in there.
Are you ready to get woke? Welcome to the Woke as Fuck podcast with your host, Alex Lazarev.
So with you guys, so I met you guys briefly at Shambhala about 8 or 9 months, actually almost a year ago, I guess. There was some event, and we were in a taxi, and you told me about your permaculture and all this kind of stuff, and I found out that people were coming from all over the world to learn what you guys are doing, and I thought that was great. And I know nothing, nothing whatsoever. Total city boy, lived in Toronto, 5 million people, London, millions of people, LA, so disconnected. That's why I love being here so much and reconnecting and learning, and it's just such a beautiful thing to be down here. Yes. So and from knowing you guys only a little bit really, but just you're just very happy. Like, look, she's smiling all the time. It's like she never stops smiling. She's always in a happy place. You not so much, but still usually still pretty good. So it just struck me that you must be. I'm sure you guys have lots of interesting stories, personal stories about your own growth and your own path and what led you to do this whole permaculture thing. And I just had an intuition that you'd have a lot to share and a lot to offer about your personal journey as well as what you're doing here.
Nice to hear that.
Yes.
Here we are.
All right.
So what is a good place to start? You guys are both from the States?
Yes.
Ohio
and Hawaii.
Roshni spent most of his adult life in Hawaii, which shouldn't be in the States, but it is. And I spent my 20s in Canada, mostly British Columbia, but most of my life I've spent in Boulder, Colorado. And I have deep roots there, 4 generations there. So it took Roshni to pull me out of there, but I'm very glad to be here in Vilcabamba.
Yeah.
And for all the many reasons. And
it was our coming together that helped us to realize we had to get out of the U.S. and find a place where we could live sustainably. Yeah, and this is it. Yeah.
We've advanced so much in terms of creating a model, because it's pretty much what permaculturalists do, and is just, try to live the way that you think could help the world. And try to minimize, so we're really into minimizing our carbon footprint, and so all of the hidden oil calories that are in steel and cement. So we built with wood and mud, and but we've just been able to do so much more here in Ecuador.
Yeah.
A lot because we're not so hampered by the local laws.
Well, that's one of the big motivational factors to leave the West. It's just so much BS paperwork and rules and blah blah blah. It's just it's insane.
Yeah.
So we just had New Year here, and it's people lighting fireworks and jumping over effigies they're burning and partying, and it's like that would be, if that was in the U.S., the SWAT team would come and arrest everyone. And here the cops are just watching everyone burn stuff and in a controlled way, and everyone had fun and there was no problems. Can't do that.
Yeah. And granted, some of the laxity that's here is simply because there isn't the infrastructure and the power structure to be able to put more clams on. But anyway, let's live it up while we can. That was one of my grandmother's sayings. She always said that. Live it up.
Yeah.
While you're young.
And to live this lifestyle in Hawaii would be almost impossible because of the cost of living. And the things are so spread out. You need a car to get anywhere. Even though the ocean's beautiful, it's often an hour or 2 hours away. And here, because of the cost of living and the lifestyle and that Ecuador is an agricultural based community, so many people are still living off the land, and so much of the food is grown locally that we fit in with the
local
with
culture.
the agricultural community. Yeah. And because of the large number of organic farms here and the organic consciousness, it's wonderful to have friends who are living that lifestyle. And the organic community is really strong here, stronger than any place I've lived. Yeah, because we're all so close. We're within walking distance. Yeah, literally.
And we could call it the organic movement or sustainability consciousness is really interwoven with the spiritual consciousness. And, and I think people really understand that as we increase our self-reliance, that has a reverse effect on the power structure. They lose energy when we get more self-reliant. And that the more people that do that, it has a big effect. It has a potential to stop them in their tracks. We haven't quite done that yet. But it's like, why not? What else you gonna do? It's just do your best. For me, sometimes I stop and I think, maybe everything we're doing makes no difference at all. Well, I would still go on trying to live in a way that is reflective of the kind of world we want to be in, and how do we create balance with Pachamama. So
how do we create the world that we want?
How do we create the world we want?
So that everyone can be healthy. Yeah.
And part of that is, living simply so others can simply live, and realizing, wow, this is so much easier than when I had an almost 4,000 square foot house and a massive mortgage, and I had to get in the car every time I wanted to, buy some food or buy a box of nails.
Yeah.
And so we're very happy not to have a car. And that was a decision that we made. We bought land that was close enough to the village so we wouldn't have to have a car.
We've been tempted.
We've been tempted.
And we've looked at those suckers.
Suckers is right. And we're in a small town where the taxis are pickup trucks, and only costs us $3 to get a ride home. And that's usually how we get home, because we've made purchases. But we like that we can walk to town. That we're pretty pedestrian. And
so here's a question for you guys.
Yes.
I guess it's a double question. I think I have a pre-question before the double question. The pre-question is just a little bit about sort of where you guys were at, what you were up to in life before you sort of got on this path. Or maybe you were just born and you were like 8 years old and you're like, we're gonna do biodynamic farming. But I'm assuming there was a curve. There was something going on that led you to this.
Yes. Shortly after college, I moved to Hawaii, and maybe because the people, the family I was living with, had a little garden there. I started to work in the garden, and then I started to expand it, and then I was working at a hotel and saved up enough money, and within a year I quit the hotel and I had bought a rototiller and a shredder grinder and all my garden tools, and I just did that for 3 years without working at anything else. And that was a lifestyle that was just so satisfying after the intensity of living in a city and going to college and being in India for a year in the Peace Corps. And it was just so good just to have a garden. And that's all I did all day long, was garden. And I loved it. And it gave me just an appreciation for organic agriculture and working on my own and working on my own schedule. And after that, I just went through a series of starting small gardens and farms and working in organic landscaping. And it just found that so satisfying that that's what I did pretty much with my life after that, until I got into teaching children. And that's my agricultural history. and Zia.
And you didn't mention Rudolf Steiner.
And then after being an organic gardener and studying with Rodale and his boys for many years, they were the only ones around that were talking agriculture. I ran into biodynamics, and I just almost quit agriculture and gardening because it was so much work and it was so exhausting. And when I found biodynamics, it gave me a new understanding of agriculture, of life, really. And a way to do it that was a lot less work, because I could make the compost on my farm that was so powerful that I needed a lot less of it. And so biodynamics has just been so inspiring for me as a way to really understand the invisible forces, the spiritual forces that are active in nature and in agriculture. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And so I'll answer your question. I got involved in gardening pretty early on. I was a draft dodger. The Vietnam War, actually, they didn't have my number, but I left the United States because of the Vietnam War, we could say, with a lot of other people that were, on the run from the military, and including my brother. And that got me into a rural lifestyle in British Columbia. And, Ram Dass's book, Chop Wood, Carry Water, that was huge for me. And, Timothy Leary saying, drop in and drop out. And I didn't even want to know who's the president of the United States for years. Just don't bother me with that stuff. And I never want to have running water again or electricity. Who cares? And there were people in my life that had these massive, beautiful gardens. And, we gardened then and we weren't that successful at it. But it's something that gets in your blood. It's infectious. It's so fun. You're in this direct relationship with life. It's a relationship. And then you start to get a little bigger scale going. And then, I start feeling like more, let's do it bigger and better. And even though I only have a 1 acre farm.
My little garden just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was using other people's property and leasing land, yeah.
Yeah, so, in college, I was studying psychology, biology. I was kind of interested in physical therapy. I was interested in architecture. I ended up, my main career has been in holistic body therapy, Aston patterning. It's movement-based body work. So I'm trained to be able to see how somebody walks and understand why they hurt, where they hurt. And what's interesting, it's really, you develop these very keen visual skills with that work. Very refined visual skills to be able to see that. And it's similar with doing permaculture design. You're looking at a landscape. I mean, when I'm on a road trip now, or even when I'm looking across the valley at Mandango Mountain, the sacred mountain here, I'm going, where could we swale that? How would we want to use the water that's coming off of that mountain to better benefit all the species there and the humans also? How could we collect water? How could we redirect water?
And promote reforestation, huh?
And that when we do that, then we have a hope in hell. We have a hope to establish some. Actually, what we're doing is we're establishing conditions that mimic a forest. Okay, so what? How can we mimic a forest if there is no forest? Well, in a forest, the rain falls and the tree cover slows the rain down, and it also warms the earth. And I'm getting into Schauberger territory, and he's a very spiritual dude. And Roshni
cools the
this
earth.
Guy. It cools the earth. It cools the earth.
Cools the earth, provides shade and cools the earth so that the water is attracted to the earth from the clouds. And that when the water falls,
it can penetrate.
It can penetrate because the earth is cooler than the air. that's when water will go into the earth and be absorbed.
So part of what hampers reforestation is when land is denuded and the land warms up and it gets compacted. And when the rain that's falling is cooler than the earth, it causes the water to just run off and create erosion. And so the swales, water retention landscaping, and you can get a good idea of this if you go to our website, vidaverde.info, of what this looks like on some of the things we have worked on. And so it slows the water down and lets the water sink in. And then also the swales are just ditches on contour. They run perpendicular to the fall line of the water coming down the hill. So they slow the water down and they create like a ditch and then a mound. And on the mound, you can plant trees and you can plant vetiver, different kinds of grasses that will really slow the water down and stabilize the ground. So that is a process. It's a process that's very intriguing. It's exciting. You read the land, and then you're in relationship with it, and then over time you're caring for it. You're developing a strategy to help heal it.
And we see the need for it. Just as we sit here and we look out on all the valleys around us, all of those valleys, all of those mountains that used to be full of trees and forests and vegetation and growth, they've all been stripped because of burning and overgrazing. And now coming in with chemical use. And so we don't get the rainfall that we used to. It's inconsistent now.
The leaves help
And
bring the rain.
And we see that desertification, the increase of the desert all over the earth is increasing. And how can we change that? How can we bring back the forest? How can we bring back the life, which will bring back the rain cycles, which will bring back life to this land? So it's important.
Okay, well, that pretty much, to a degree, answers my next obvious question, which you've kind of covered, but which is why is what you're doing here on the farm and, the way that you do things here, why is it important? Why is it important to learn how to do things this way?
Well, I'm glad we talked about some of the more physical, pragmatic aspects, and we can circle back around to that. But I really think that the undercurrent, maybe the more important answer is, it's about giving back. It's about shifting the way that we are with everything to get us out of that take. It's all for me. The exploitation orientation that Western culture has developed. And so we recently had the opportunity, it was a huge, very exciting thing for us to be asked to do a water retention landscaping plan for 2 large water juntas. Now that's a word that's used for, we would say in American English, we would call it a water association. But here in Ecuador, most people in rural areas get their water, their potable water, from these water associations that are run by the membership. The work is done by people sharing the work on work days, and
the water is captured from rivers or reservoirs or underground, and then brought to the community.
Right. And, it's so often it's done, like it is all over the world, with more and more plastic pipe and more cement and, cement-lined reservoirs.
And big pumps.
And big pumps that use a lot of electricity. And So the person who was at that time the president of this water association that served 12 communities, was it? 40,000 people
Yeah.
between the two water juntas. He had taken our permaculture class. And he was an old friend of ours, actually. He's a beautiful sound healer and in the Quechua tradition. And many would call him a shaman. That's actually not a Latin American term, but and so it's not something that he really adheres to, that term. But
he's a spiritual and cultural leader.
he's a spiritual and cultural leader, yeah. And so he, through our permaculture design course, he knew the potential of this, and he knew that they live. These Quechua communities live at the base of the massive Imbabura volcano, and he understood. Oh, this sacred mountain has been denuded, and we should be sinking this rainwater into the land, or all of our springs are going to dry up. And so we got to design that, and what we designed was really not the whole 18 kilometers of land that are around the base of Imbabura, because that would have been a big expenditure just in itself. But we designed a plan for training local people how to train. We were going for a majority of that membership, so like around 20,000 people, taking a workshop of a couple of days so that everybody really understood and could really wholeheartedly take part in the process.
With the intention of preserving that watershed, of keeping it alive and active. One water junta uses the water from a spring that's on the top of Imbabura Mountain. And if that spring goes dry, there goes their water. And the other water junta uses the same water, but it filters down through the mountain and they catch it at the bottom. So how can we preserve that source? How can we and keep that spring, that water system alive and not let that spring dry out?
So because we were working with the Quechua and they hold it that way, we realized a better term for this is Aini. Aini is a Quechua word for reciprocity.
A-Y-N-I.
A-Y-N-I. So we titled it in our proposal the Agua Aini Water Restoration Project, because when you do this over time, you sink water into the land, it restores the aquifers and the springs, as well as the forests. And then the forests will help the water cycle. They will help through transpiration and evaporation send the water back up into the cloud layer. And so that concept of giving water back to the land and just, getting that straightened around instead of us always taking, we should be giving back. This planet really is our mother. I mean, it's not just a metaphor, she's given us everything. We can say she's given us life. Our bones and flesh are made from the elements that came from the earth. And so then when we can get in a place where we recognize that the thing that's most satisfying isn't who dies with the most toys. The thing that's most satisfying is when we can find a balance, so that we're really living in balance with nature.
And if I can answer that question briefly, why we're doing this, why we have a garden here and why we've put a lot of work into agriculture, is so that we can feed ourselves and so that we can encourage the community to feed itself. Because as we know, 70 years ago, there was no road into this town. And so everyone had to grow their own food. And that's when Vilcabamba was healthy. That's when Vilcabamba was known as the place of longevity. That's when people lived a long, healthy life. They had to work all day long to grow their food, and they were eating all natural food. And since then, the health has just gone downhill. So we want to keep ourselves healthy and grow our own food. We want to encourage the organic community, all of our neighbors to grow organically. And so we spend a lot of our time supporting the Saturday organic market that's here. And
Yep.
It has been thriving, and other communities to start an organic market and to expand the community organic situation.
Localization, yeah.
One way we do that is by fostering a seed exchange a couple times a year, where we have people come to the farm and we exchange our seeds, and it promotes the healthiest plants we can. Yeah.
What does being on the spiritual path mean to you?
Oh, well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that. Do you want to start, hon?
I can start with just remembering that long ago, in ancient times, the people really considered the earth as our mother, and that the earth was sacred because of who she is, because of also that she offers. And the earth is a gift. And that more recently, I've come to understand that our consciousness, the human consciousness, is linked to the evolution of the earth. And it's up to us to develop our consciousness and ways to help the earth, the soil, to stay alive through our conscious. And that's what biodynamic gives us. Biodynamics gives us a way to reinvigorate the earth with life forces. So biodynamics is all about working with life forces, feeding them into the soil, into the earth, so that the earth can feed us. It is mutual. We feed the earth feeds us. We promote each other. It's totally symbiotic. And I wouldn't want to. One of the main inspiring people in biodynamics to me has been Dennis Klocek, Klocek. He's got some great documentaries on YouTube. I recommend everyone studying him. He's totally entertaining, totally enlightening being, and he's just kept me interested in agriculture and fascinated with how things work. So please check out Dennis Klocek.
Dennis Klocek is one of our
The man.
one of our bedtime stories that we keep coming back to. Yeah. Well, spiritual can be perceived and experienced in so many different ways. I mean, I think, one thing I come back to is the golden rule, which is not just one of the Christian tenets, in the Ten Commandments, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But it's in all of the religions, and it just makes sense, right? If we want to get along with each other, we aim at that. Most of us in I'll call it the consciousness movement, we recognize the earth as a being. And then let's do the golden rule toward the earth as a being.
Mm-hmm. Towards all beings, yes.
And toward all beings, and recognize that it, of course, the web of life, it's a web. So there's that level, and just, living in mutual respect is a spiritual life. Can we stay in peace? But then there's also the side where we think of spirit as being beyond the physical or metaphysical, and metaphysical experiences have always been really intriguing to me, and I've been blessed with many. and one of my big attractions is developing the skills that help us communicate directly with nature and communicate with plants, and start to recognize that plants are very multidimensional beings. They're, if we can slow our thinking minds down enough that we can settle in and just zero in on one single stream of consciousness that a plant is carrying, we can get an enormous amount of pertinent information for how to live our lives. And, people have done this throughout the ages. I mean, like if you ask indigenous people, how do they know all these qualities of 40,000 different medicinal herbs, and they will tell you the same thing. They'll say, from the plant, the plant told me.
Yeah.
And then different traditions for how this is done is being brought to us now in this age, right? It's an age of many wisdom streams are being revealed to us.
And that's a spiritual attunement, because you're working with unseen forces. You're working with the forces of the plant that are unseen, to tune into it and have it be able to talk to us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when we tune in, my experience is that when we tune in, the plants are there. They're like, what took you so long? Where have you been? And everyone says that takes the time to tune in. It's it's the common story. And so for a couple decades now, I've been just like looking for ways to have this conversation with people, and that's one of the reasons I keep teaching permaculture, because in the evening programs in our permaculture design course that's coming up toward the end of this month,
in Vilcabamba,
we unleash ourselves from the definition that some people have of what permaculture should be. Like there's a camp that believes that permaculture should be only within the realms of what can be scientifically verified. And so we do that curriculum, we do that thing during the day, and then in the evenings, we unleash ourselves and we talk about things that many consider to be metaphysical. Of course, many things that are considered to be metaphysical are simply misunderstood. They haven't been understood yet.
Mm-hmm.
So Roshni talks about biodynamics, and then I talk about some of the different methods and traditions for how do we communicate with our plant spirit guides, our animal spirit guides.
Mm-hmm.
How do we tune into nature and retrieve information about how do we be here in balance and harmony?
Yes.
And what do you talk about in those evening programs? People love Roshni's presentations in those programs.
I have to say I'm totally inspired by Dennis Klochek, who talks. He has books on the weather, on clouds, on the environment, on spiritual studies, and nature and humanity, and basically follow his lead, and work with his inspiration. And he's a spiritual scientist again, and an alchemist of the highest level, who can really help us to understand these things. Yeah, and it's helped me to understand how things work.
You can tell we're in the country there.
Yeah, I love the Au
rooster
Natural
is crowing.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are not in a recording studio, folks. Unless people think that's like a fake rooster. We're just putting that in to make it more authentic. That's not a real rooster. And you can get that audio file for
You
free.
can turn the rooster off now.
Yeah. So let's get a little juicier here. We love to talk about mystical experiences on the podcast, and boy, have there been many happening to many of our guests. Did you, for you guys, did you have, what was the first moment or experience where you thought there's something more going on here? This reality is not simply as it's being presented to us. A moment where you sort of began to wake up, as it were.
Yes.
From, quote, the Matrix.
Right. It happened to me when I started using the biodynamic preparations. And I was told, I heard stories about it. I heard stories about people putting the sprays on, and all the cows would go to this one area where they put these. The biodynamic preparations are biodynamic fertilizers, biodynamic amendments, we could say. So, one of the first times I put them on my property, that very same afternoon, an entire herd of elk came and stayed on the land. And I hadn't even seen elk within this farm before. And then another time I put the preparations on, and I saw hawks. I forget the name of them. Hawks flying over the land that I had never seen before. One time I used it in a landscape preparation where the land was I was putting in a sod job, putting in a lawn, and I put in a layer of manure and then a layer of biodynamic preparations, and the soil was concrete. I mean, there was nothing but solid, hard clay. And then within a few days, the property was full of worms. And
That's impressive.
And at biodynamic conferences, I heard the story where a farmer sprayed part of his land with biodynamic preparations, and up to a point. And as soon as he did that, all the cows on the property moved over to the land and stayed there until they ate all the grass down, until they would move away. So, and when I would mix the preparations on the ranch I used to work for, the dogs would come up and lap the stuff up. I had to shoo them away. They would just want to drink it. And so just the attraction to animals, to these herbal and cow manure based preparations were just magical. Just magical.
So you wanted to understand.
So I wanted to understand. And then my first experience with tasting biodynamic food, when I was in England, living next to a biodynamic farm, they would bring over beets every once in a while from the farm. And these beets, I didn't know beets could taste like this. They were so enlivening. It was like drinking coconut water. It was just totally energizing. And the taste was fantastic. And so I had this experience that biodynamics could bring back the flavor, not only the nutrition, been proven the nutrition is enhanced, but the flavor back in foods. And that's one of the reasons biodynamics was started, because the farmers realized the food was losing its flavor back in 1924. Didn't have any flavor, was losing its nutrition. And so with the use of these biodynamic preparations, we can bring back both nutrition and flavor to the food. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I heard you say what was an experience that started to wake you up to the fact that there's more out there than just this 3D reality and what the Matrix wants us to believe and be good little sheep and good little consumers. Yeah.
So what was your first not being a good little sheep experience?
Well, what came to mind that I want to share, this was when I was studying massage in Boulder in 1978 or so. And it was the first time I had an experience of doing a guided visualization and walked down a stairway in my imagination and was met at the bottom of the stairway by this very old Native American man that had braids that came down to his knees, and he had a blanket wrapped around him, and he opened his blanket and he handed me a wing, a white wing. And as soon as he handed it to me, I took it and I became an Arctic owl, and I was drafted under the wing of a thunderbird. And the thunderbird was massive. And I was tiny underneath the thunderbird's wing. We were flying very high. And I was still flapping my wings. I didn't really need to, because there was this tremendous draft that I was riding. And this thunderbird took me up and down the Rocky Mountains. And he was showing me my life. At the time, I was kind of hitchhiking between going to massage school in Boulder, and then I would hitchhike up to British Columbia and do tree planting to make money. And he indicated to me a place in between those 2 points that didn't have meaning to me at the time, but some 15 years later, I became very close to a family of Arapaho Native American people and an amazing shamanic healer on that reservation, Stan Addison, a quadriplegic horse whisperer person. The most amazing person I've ever met. So there's no turning back after you have an experience like that, right? You can't deny it. Other people could deny it, but if it's something that is really real to you, there's no way that you can just pretend that didn't happen. And so then you become a seeker. And then the stories start mounting up, huh?
They sure do. They sure do. So you had you went on the guided village. This happened during the visualization.
This was a what happened in the visualization. Yeah.
Because for a second it sounded like you did the visualization, and then as you were leaving, this guy walks after you, and then you were carried off by a real massive bird. Which also wouldn't surprise me.
It did feel very real. Yeah.
This doggy is super cute.
We have a new doggy in the family. She's
great.
She's
super chill.
And she was magic too. She just showed up one day.
She just came and said,
and
I need a family.
Yeah, well, that's the way to do it. Invite yourself. That's what I do too sometimes. All right. So, while we're on the topic, any other mystical experiences? I mean, I love those. Those are always so much fun.
One that comes to mind while you think of yours. One of the practices that I love as a holistic health practitioner is continuum movement work, Emily Conrad's work. It's a really exquisite work that involves how do we use the gifts that have been given us, just the breath, sound, and movement, to access the psychotropic chemicals that reside within us, the entheogens that are within. And so sometimes in the circle I was doing this with wonderful leader from Boulder, Gail Olgren, she invited us to do an all-night dive, we would call it, on winter solstice. And so after doing these intense, I was on this track of just, everyone kind of is doing their own thing in this work. It's not like a disciplined count your breaths or hold your breath a certain number. It's you're given guidelines of different sounds and breathing patterns to play with. And so doing this all night long, and I got up before dawn and walked across the fields, really drawn like a magnet to this hill that is a old volcanic mound, a little bit northeast of Boulder, and I just marched right up to the top of that hill, and I sat down and I did a practice, a Cherokee meditation. Still my main practice, the Diamond Body practice. It involves chanting and visualization at each chakra level, and I had my eyes closed, and it took me about a half hour, and when I opened my eyes, I turned my head to the right, which was looking west. There was a red-tailed hawk about an arm's length away from me, and it was hovering. It was not moving. It turned and it looked me in the eye. And then it circled all around the top of this mountain where I was sitting and flew off to the north on the winter solstice, which is the place of the north. And so there's just times when nature gives us such strong, incredibly strong signals, that sometimes, I mean, for that one, I didn't feel like it was particularly a download of information. It was just a incredibly inspiring vote of support. It was a
Yes.
gift,
Right.
and I'll never forget it, the feeling of it.
How about your experience with the plant being at your service? That's a good story.
Another one.
Sure. The more the merrier.
One of my incarnations doing holistic body work, I migrated into the water and I developed a method called Agua Alma, which is akin to Watsu and different forms of aquatic body work. And I was working in the pool one day with a client that is someone that studies Rudolf Steiner and does a lot of spiritual practices. And this little elf-like person, like he was from the New Age Cadet Academy,
Being.
he's a little being, and he takes his hat off and he bows very low and says, "At your service." And then he jumps inside this person's body and starts directing the session very specifically. So it would be like, now your left hand on her occiput and your right hand on her left knee, and now rotate this way, and giving me very specific directions while he was going to her right hip socket and opening valves and using his wand to send energy down to her right foot. And I was just like amazed. And I following instructions. I was just, what do? You follow instructions. And people ask me, how did you associate that with yarrow? I knew that it was the spirit of yarrow.
The plant yarrow.
And the healing herb yarrow. And I knew because in the edges of my peripheral vision there was the leaf, and I'm very familiar with the leaf. And yarrow is something that I had a very long relationship with over decades. And then every once in a while the flower, which is a very simple flower, it would be right up close, right in front of me. And so my understanding is that sometimes the plant spirits, I agree with the people that say the plant spirits, sometimes they will appear to us anthropomorphized, just so they can get our attention, and it certainly did. And so then actually that was a signal to start, I developed a collection of flower essences, and yarrow was the first one, and that I sold I had a herb farm in Boulder and a herbal CSA. It only lasted for a few years, but we had a collection of flower essences that we sold. We didn't use the physical plant. I would wait until I had developed it was usually a very long-term relationship, as with yarrow. And then I would be called by the plant. It would be like, "You, get over here." Called by the plant. And to sit down and engage it in conversation. And if it felt appropriate, ask, "May I have your medicine? And in return, what can I do for you?" And it would always be an exchange.
I thought of two magical experiences
All
that I
right.
had.
All right.
All right.
So the first one was, trying to briefly, I was working at a ranch in Rifle, Colorado, and I just started working with a Maria Tune biodynamic calendar, which gives indications for the best day to work with with roots or leaves, leafy plants, or fruits. And And on this calendar, which comes out of Germany, it said on this particular day, and I was at this ranch, high altitude Colorado, middle of the summer, hadn't rained in weeks, didn't look like it was going to rain in weeks, really dry area. It said on the biodynamic calendar that there was a good chance of hail, that is ice, falling out of the sky. So I laughed at that, yeah. Well, that afternoon it hailed on this ranch
Wow.
in the middle of the summer.
And it was on the calendar.
It was on the calendar.
Oh, wow.
It blew my mind. It gave me new belief in the biodynamic calendar, yes, which is a great resource for knowing when's a good day to plant and what good day to harvest. Another experience I had, I did my internship for biodynamics at the Rudolf Steiner College in outside of Sacramento, California. And
that was a 1.5 year internship, not a month.
so so I worked there for a year, so I got to see the procedure, and the main thing, almost the only thing that we fertilized with was just an inch of biodynamic compost. Now, if you know, an inch of compost is not much to put an inch on and then dig it into the soil. But when this farm started a few years before I got there, it had been scraped by bulldozers. It had been turned like into a parking lot. They had scraped all the topsoil off, disturbed the whole thing. The soil was bad anyway. But this is in Sacramento, where the rainfall is very low all year round. And this place had been totally disturbed. And the farmer, Harold Hoven, my teacher, would just put on an inch of biodynamic compost and then work it in. And within a few years, he had turned this terrible, not even soil, into a garden, into a farm, which was producing wonderful vegetables. And so to me, that's magic. Because, the university will tell you can't grow topsoil. You can't grow, it takes centuries to grow topsoil. And with biodynamic compost, you can grow topsoil in just a few years.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's magic for me.
I love that.